My name is Thanos, and today I'm going to talk to you about investigating ad transparency mechanisms in social media. In particular, we will focus on a case study of Facebook's explanations. These days, we're being surrounded by automated, data-driven decision-making systems. Systems like recommender systems, which feed on your data to recommend products on you. Or systems like criminal risk assessment tools, which are being used by courts to decide whether a person has a high recidivism risk or not. Systems that are being used in credit scores calculations. And last but not least, targeted advertising, which will be at the core of today's talk. The problem with such systems is that they are very frequently black boxes with not much information on how they work. That is particularly worrisome because these systems usually use users' personal data at a massive scale. Imagine, for example, all the data that Facebook is monitoring from all the users, all the personal data. On the other hand, they also take decisions about users which can affect them. Decisions like which ad to show you, which has its consequences, as we see in all this discussion about political ads these days, or decisions like whether you should remain in jail or not. Consequently, explanations on how these systems work to users are becoming increasingly important. This is also being reflected in current legislation. For example, in Europe, we have several laws, the most prominent being the GDPR, which will be enforced this May, and establishes a right to explanations. However, explaining things is not a trivial job. The systems that need to be explained usually are very complex. Imagine having to explain to someone why when he Googles something, these results appear and why they appear in this order. Also, there are many different design choices, and it's not clear how to design an explanation. For example, an explanation can be a text, or an image, or a graph. An explanation can be a very detailed explanation, or a very concise and compact explanation. Ultimately, we don't know what a good explanation is. A good explanation might promote trust. A good explanation might satisfy curiosity of people. A good explanation might deter malicious behavior, for example, discrimination in targeted advertising. A good explanation might even verify compliance of the rules for a system. In this talk, we'll take a deeper look on explanations by taking a concrete example and focusing on that of Facebook's targeted advertising explanations. First, I'm going to give you an overview of targeted advertising in Facebook. Then we're going to discuss about some properties of explanations we defined that can help us characterize and evaluate these explanations. And finally, we will evaluate Facebook's explanations. So, these screenshots are from some ads that appeared in my Facebook page as I was scrolling down my feed for less than 2 minutes just a few days ago. As you can see, in a small amount of time, I received different ads of different types. For example, ads about food, ads about online shops, and ads about coding. When I see these ads, when I see an ad like that, I ask a question. Why am I seeing this ad? This is also the question that is the central point of this talk. Let's go now behind the curtain to see what happens. Facebook allows advertisers to target users using many different attributes. Here, this screenshot is a screenshot from the Facebook ad managers, and as you can see, an advertiser can target users using classical age, gender, location attributes for the targeting, or even more fine-grained attributes, like interests, behaviors, or demographics. After that, the advertiser basically places some bid and some optimization strategies and launches an ad. Indeed, there exist thousands and thousands of fine-grained attributes that advertisers can use to target people. Advertisers can target users interested in beer, users that live away from their family, or users that have their anniversary in a few days. They can even combine all these attributes. For example, they can target users that have an interest in beer and have their anniversary, but live away from their family. Don't live away from the family, for example. Additionally, Facebook has created some partnership with some external companies, data broker companies like Axiom, Epsilon, or Experian. These companies collect data from offline sources, such as supermarket loyalty cards or public records, and they acquire information about users, such as, for example, information about their income level, or information about their purchasing behavior, whether they own a house or not, etc. Then they give this data to Facebook, and Facebook makes even more attributes available to advertisers. Amidst this plethora of attributes, there exist many attributes that can be considered as invasive for many people. Attributes related to sexual preferences, like homosexuality. Attributes related to political views, even very extreme ones. You can target users that are interested in fascism, for example. Or attributes related to the income level of people, as we said before. Moreover, Facebook has data on nearly everybody. Taking into consideration that Facebook can reach to 230 million users in the United States, Facebook has inferred some attributes for dozens of millions of users. For example, for politics, they have inferred the political affiliation of nearly 80% of their users. So we see that targeted advertising is a very complex system. And answering a question like, why am I seeing this ad, must be answered in different levels. Why did I receive this ad? First, Facebook inferred some attributes about me. Then, an advertiser used these attributes to select an audience that included me. Finally, Facebook matched the ad to me through some auctions that happened behind the curtain. In this talk, we will focus on what Facebook tells you when you ask them directly, why am I seeing this ad? And you can actually ask Facebook really easily, why are you seeing this ad? Every ad has a button in Facebook, the why am I seeing this button. And if you click on it, you will get an explanation that looks like that. Typically, there are two parts. In the first part, you will see something like, one reason you are seeing this ad is that the advertiser wants to reach people interested in Ferrero based on activities such as liking pages or clicking on ads. The first part presents some attributes, actually one attribute that was used by the advertiser. In the second part, the wording is a little different. It tells you there may be other reasons you are seeing this ad, including that the advertiser wants to reach people ages 25 and older who live or were recently in Germany. You see that these attributes here are presented as potential attributes that might have been used in the targeting. We'll talk about this later and why is this important. So now let's talk about the properties of explanations. We do not claim that we know what a good explanation looks like. Instead, we reflect on some desired properties that we believe that can help us characterize and evaluate these explanations. We basically define these properties by asking some simple questions when we're looking at the explanations. For example, do explanations show all the attributes that were used by the advertisers? Are the explanations correct? Are the explanations personalized? Do similar ads with similar targeting trigger the same explanation to a user? Or are explanations for users that have the same attribute consistent? You can look at our paper for a full review of all these properties. In this talk, we will focus on the two first, completeness and correctness. What do we mean by completeness? Suppose we have a user that is interested in koalas and kangaroos. And suppose we have an advertiser that wants to target users interested in koalas and kangaroos. A complete explanation would be an explanation that mentions both of these attributes in the explanation. Anything less is incomplete. However, as we said before, these properties allow us to evaluate. It doesn't mean that incomplete explanations are inherently bad. An incomplete explanation can be succinct, useful, and ultimately preferable, especially for explanations that go to users about ads. Now let's talk about correctness. In the previous example, an incorrect explanation would be an explanation that doesn't mention the attribute that was used by the advertiser. For example, if the explanation mentioned wallabies, then it's an incorrect explanation. Also, remember, we have also potential attributes. If a potential attribute that appears in the explanation was not used by the advertiser, we say that the explanation is misleading. So, now that we have defined some properties and explained them, let's see what happens in Facebook. In order to do that, we developed a Chrome extension to collect ads from the Facebook timeline of users. In total, we collected 26,000 unique ads and explanations from 35 users. Additionally, we did some controlled experiments in order to evaluate the explanations. Basically, we became the advertisers. We targeted users using different attributes, and then we collected the explanations from the ads from the users that we monitored. So basically, we had the actual targeting that we used and the explanation that the user saw. And then we compared these two to make our observations. In total, we landed 36 successful experiments that reached one or more of our monitored users. We found different explanations Regarding the first part of explanation, we identified 10 different patterns that correspond to different types of attributes such as interests, behaviors, or demographics. For example, explanations for interests look like that. One reason you are seeing this ad is that Acer wants to reach people interested in electronic music. On the other hand, explanations for data brokers, for example, don't mention the attribute. For example, you see Canal France wants to reach people who are part of an audience created based on data provided by Axiom. Facebook tells you about the data broker, but not about the attribute. So let's now see if explanations are complete. The first thing that we notice is that we see only one attribute in the explanation. That's a little weird because, as we saw before, advertisers can use many different combinations of many different attributes. We did some controlled experiments to check that. We basically targeted users using more than one attribute. For example, we saw that if we target users interested in instant messaging and mobile phones, the explanation will only mention instant messaging. So basically, Facebook shows only one of the attributes that are being used. Now we wanted to see if there is a logic behind which attribute appears. We did several experiments trying different attributes and combinations of them, and we observed that the attribute that appears depends on the attribute type. So for example, if we target users using a demographic and an interest, or a demographic or a behavior, the demographic attribute will appear in the explanation, which is also kind of counterintuitive. Maybe someone might accept that behavioral attributes are a little more important than demographic. Also, we noticed that when attributes of the same type are being used in the targeting, the attribute that appears is the attribute with the highest reach, the attribute that has been inferred for the most users in Facebook. For data broker attributes, things are even worse, because as we saw before, they don't even mention the attribute. And remind you, data broker attributes are things like income data, home ownership, home type, purchasing behavior, things that maybe a user might be interested in learning about. So we see that Facebook explanations are not complete. They show at most one attribute in their explanations. OK, they're not complete. But let's see, for example, if they are correct. We did several controlled experiments, and we saw that when we target users without specifying a location, location will appear as a potential attribute. So, for example, if we target a user that lives in France, but we don't specify that we want to target users that live in France, this user will receive an explanation that says that we may have targeted him because he lives in France. So, Facebook explanations can also be misleading. And there are some consequences because of all of this. For incomplete explanations that are designed in this way, a malicious advertiser can conceal the discriminatory attribute that he wants to use. For example, if an advertiser wants to target homosexuals but doesn't want them to know that he's targeting them because of that, he can pick some other attribute also in the targeting, which he will make sure that will appear in the explanation, thus hiding the true purpose of this targeting. Also, misleading explanations fail to capture accurately the reasons why a user is being targeted, which is actually the reason why we need explanations in the first place. This highlights the need to establish some properties that can help us create better explanations, some standards if you need. So, some takeaways from this talk is that we defined some desired properties for explanations, and we tried to characterize and evaluate Facebook explanation based on these properties. We saw that current Facebook explanations are incomplete and misleading, and now, and you can read more in our paper for a full review and also check the other properties. The open question now is how to design better explanations, especially, for example, in the case of incomplete explanations, how to make them succinct, how to choose the most important attributes to show. Also, what do users want to see in an explanation? This concludes my talk. I would like to take one more minute for your time to talk to you about the tool we developed, Ad Analyst, which is a tool that can help you make more sense of the ads that you receive in Facebook. Basically, we collect the ads of the user and enhance the current transparency of Facebook by showing some aggregated statistics to the users or by combining users that receive the same ad or ads from the same advertiser to help them make some more sense of their targeting. If you are interested, go ahead and download it. Just remember to disable your ad block or similar software for Facebook. Thanks a lot. Questions?
Hi there. I'm Daniel Kahn Gilmore from the ACLU. Thank you for this work. It's we need more transparency, and I'm glad you're taking these steps. I'm a little afraid that the problem is worse than what you've described. So you mentioned the completeness, and I think your description of what counts as complete is whether we see all the things that the advertiser was targeting. But if you look at the impact, the social impact of these targeting systems, the completeness would also need to take into account those advertisers who are not targeting you, right? So you mentioned an advertiser targeting a homosexual. The classic case of employment discrimination is where someone who's advertising for jobs maybe wants to hire men instead of women. The women won't see the ad, right? So they'll see a different ad because there's a place to show an ad, right? So I think when you're talking about completeness, we need to look at actually the ecosystem picture of completeness, not just what this particular ad was, but why you didn't see the other pieces. Do you have any ideas about how you could represent that in an explanation?
Well, I suppose that would be much more difficult to solve because there might be many things to solve. We don't know. Actually, we would like to see what can happen and what can see. Basically, we created these properties just to also start the conversation and see what other people can think of that and find some standards for explanations. That's actually a very good point that we cannot really see how an explanation would be like that. It's interesting to see.
From CISPA, thanks for the interesting and also very high volume talk. Did you ever talk to Facebook about their reasons for doing this? So I'm wondering whether there's like a deceptive nature in that, or whether they say, well, this characterizes the ad sufficiently that we don't need to have more verbose explanations.
Well, we didn't talk to them, but I mean, and we cannot make assumptions for that. I mean, I cannot tell you something like that. But the thing is that on one side, Facebook has a very, very complete suite of transparency mechanisms. So maybe it's the case that they didn't think of some options, and that's why it's this thing. What we want to highlight is the need to think these things better. So I don't know. I cannot answer this.
It would be interesting to kind of get their perspective on this, I guess.
Yeah.
Right, thanks.
Thanks.
I'll ask one question I wanted to
Sure.
ask. So, do you think, because you talk about consistency, which you don't go
Yeah.
into detail, they can find out that you looked into the explanation? Most users don't. So is there some possibility that they can change explanation based on this person is asking? Any idea in that space? Or?
Well, when we look at the explanations, we look on the way that the user would look at the explanation. So I don't know about that. I mean, I cannot judge that, but we don't do something weird. We just do exactly the same way. When a user sees an ad, we get the explanation. So I don't know. Yeah, I have no idea. Thanks.